Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is asking for help when you've got nothing left to give. For 72-year-old Albie Trenner, collapsing in the snow outside a stranger's cabin, those words came down to 3. Just some milk, please. He expected the door to stay closed. He expected to be turned away, like he'd been turned away from everything else. But Marn Thomley, a woman who'd spent years hiding from the world in these frozen mountains, did something neither of them saw coming. She brought him inside. What happens when two broken people, each carrying decades of regret, find themselves snowbound together with nowhere to run? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The door opened inward, and with it came a flood of warmth that felt like mercy itself. Albie Trenner could barely lift his head, could barely process what was happening, as strong hands gripped under his arms and hauled him across the threshold. His boots scraped against wood planking, leaving trails of snow that melted instantly in the cabin's heat. The woman, Marn, though he didn't know her name yet, grunted with effort as she half-carried, half-dragged him toward a chair near the wood stove. "Easy now," she said, her voice rough from disuse but not unkind. "Don't try to help. Just let me get you settled." Albie's legs gave out completely as she lowered him into the chair, a sturdy thing made of pine with a worn cushion that might once have been red. His head lolled back, and for a moment he thought he might pass out. The warmth of the cabin was almost painful against his frozen skin. His fingers, his toes, his face, everything burned with the terrible awakening of flesh that had been too close to dying. "Stay put," Marn ordered, already moving toward the back of the cabin. "Don't you dare fall out of that chair." Albie tried to nod, but managed only a slight movement of his chin. His eyes, crusted with ice at the lashes, began to thaw. Tears he hadn't meant to cry tracked down his weathered cheeks. Through blurred vision, he took in his surroundings. The cabin was a single large room, perhaps 20 feet by 25, with a sleeping loft visible above. The walls were chinked logs, darkened by decades of wood smoke and kerosene lamplight. A black iron stove dominated the center of the space, its pipe rising straight through the roof. The heat radiating from it was like a living thing, reaching out to envelope him. To his right, a rough-hewn table with 2 mismatched chairs stood against the wall. To his left, shelves held canned goods, jars of preserves, sacks of flour and beans. Everything was orderly, functional, sparse. This was not a place of comfort. It was a place of survival. Marn returned with thick wool blankets that smelled of cedar and thyme. She wrapped them around his shoulders without ceremony, tucking the edges in with practiced efficiency. Her hands were strong, calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined and weathered, her eyes a pale blue that seemed to look through him rather than at him. She wore wool trousers, a faded flannel shirt, and boots that had seen hard use. "Frostbite on your fingers," she said, examining his hands with clinical detachment. "Maybe your toes, too. We'll see." "How long were you out there?" Albie tried to speak, but his jaw wouldn't cooperate. His teeth chattered violently. "Never mind. Don't talk yet." She disappeared again, this time toward a shelf near what he assumed was a small kitchen area. When she returned, she carried a tin cup filled with something that steamed. "Warm milk. Small sips. Your stomach's not ready for much." She held the cup to his lips, and Albie tasted the milk, warm, slightly sweet, real. It was exactly what he'd asked for in that desperate moment outside her door, though he barely remembered making the request. The liquid slid down his throat, warming him from the inside. It was the most incredible thing he'd ever tasted. "Slow," Marn warned. "Too fast and you'll bring it back up." Albie obeyed, taking tiny sips between the chattering of his teeth. Gradually, the violent shaking began to subside. The blankets trapped his body heat, and the warm milk spread through his chest like a benediction. After several minutes, Marn pulled the cup away. "That's enough for now. Rest there. I need to see to my mule." She grabbed a heavy canvas coat from a peg near the door and stepped outside, letting in a blast of frigid air before pulling the door shut behind her. Albie sat in the chair, wrapped in blankets, and tried to understand how he'd arrived at this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been living in a rented room above a garage in Boise, surviving on his railroad pension and the kindness of a landlord who'd taken pity on an old man. Before that, he'd drifted through Montana and Idaho, working odd jobs when he could find them, sleeping rough when he couldn't. His life had become a slow erosion, a gradual wearing away of everything that once defined him, Albert James Trenner. Albeit to the men he'd worked with on the railroad, though there weren't many of those men left now. 43 years he'd spent on the rails, working first as a trackman and eventually as a foreman on maintenance crews. He'd known every inch of line from Spokane to Pocatello, had spent his life in the rhythm of steel and cross ties, the smell of creosote and diesel fuel. It had been honest work, hard work, work that built a country. But somewhere in all those years of work, he'd forgotten to build a family. His wife, Margaret, had died 15 years ago. Cancer swift and merciless. By then, their daughter Lily had already stopped speaking to him. The estrangement had started slowly. Missed birthdays, forgotten phone calls, his absence at her college graduation because of a work emergency that probably could have waited. The final break came when Lily got married and had a daughter of her own. She'd invited him to meet his granddaughter, to be part of their lives. He'd refused, his pride stung by what he saw as years of her pulling away from him. He'd told her that if she wanted a father, she should have acted like a daughter. 3 months later, Lily died during what should have been routine surgery. A complication with anesthesia. The kind of freak accident that steals people from the world without warning. She was 38 years old. Albie had learned about it from a brief letter from Lily's husband, a man whose name he barely remembered. There had been no invitation to the funeral, just a cold notification that his daughter was gone, and with her, any chance of reconciliation. In his coat pocket, the coat now hanging by Marn's door, dripping melting snow onto the wooden floor, was a faded railroad pocket watch. It had stopped at 3:47, the exact time his daughter was born, 40 years ago. It had also been 3:47 when he received the phone call about her death, though he hadn't realized the coincidence until later. He kept the watch anyway, broken, a reminder of beginnings and endings that happened at the same impossible moment. The door opened, and Marn returned with another gust of cold air. She hung her coat and stamped snow from her boots. "Greta's settled," she said. "Storm's getting worse. You picked a hell of a day to go wandering." "I wasn't wandering," Albie managed to say, his voice hoarse but functional. "I was trying to get through the pass." Marn snorted. "In this weather? Where were you headed?" "South. Anywhere south? Running from something or toward something?" "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." She moved to the stove, opened the door, and added 2 pieces of split wood from a box nearby. "You're stuck here now regardless. That storm's going to blow for at least a day, maybe 2. Road'll be impassable even after it clears." Albie absorbed this information, stuck with a stranger, in a cabin that felt like it existed outside of time. "I'm grateful," he said. "For the help." "I won't be any trouble. You'll be some trouble." "Can't be helped." Marn pulled off her heavy boots and replaced them with worn leather slippers. "You got a name?" "Albie Trenner, Marn Thomley." She didn't offer her hand, just nodded at him. "You stay off those feet for now. We'll see about the frostbite later." "You hungry?" "I don't want to take your food." "Wasn't asking what you wanted." "Asked if you're hungry." "Yes, ma'am." "Stop with the ma'am. Makes me feel old." She paused, then added, "Older." She moved around the small kitchen area with efficient purpose, pulling down cans and jars. Albie watched her, noting the practiced way she moved, the economy of motion that spoke of years alone. On a high shelf, almost hidden behind a row of canning jars, he spotted something incongruous, a small wooden toy, a carved horse. It seemed out of place in this austere space, a remnant of something softer. Marn caught him looking. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing, Within minutes, she had a pot of beans warming on the stove, along with thick slices of bread toasted on a cast-iron skillet. The smell filled the cabin, and Albie's stomach cramped with sudden hunger. He couldn't remember the last real meal he'd eaten. Days, maybe. She served him a tin plate with beans and bread, another cup of warm milk. "Eat slow. Your system's been through something." Albie obeyed, forcing himself to take small bites, even though he wanted to devour everything in front of him. The beans were simple, navy beans with onion and a bit of salt pork, but they tasted like the finest thing he'd ever eaten. The bread was dense and hearty, clearly homemade. Marn ate standing up, her plate resting on the counter, her back to him. There was something defensive in her posture, as if even this small act of sharing space was almost more than she could bear. "How long have you been up here?" Albie asked between bites. "Long enough. You live here year-round?" "Where else would I live?" "Town, I suppose." "Easier living down there?" "Easier's not always better." She finished her food, rinsed her plate in a bucket of water and set it to dry. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who just got pulled in from freezing to death." "Sorry. Habit, I guess. Spent a lot of years working with men. You talk or you go crazy?" "I went the other way," Marn said. She picked up a worn leather book from the table, a Bible, Albie realized, and settled into a chair on the other side of the stove. "I'll leave you be. You need sleep more than conversation." Albie finished his meal in silence, then set the plate aside. The warmth, the food, and the sheer relief of being inside all conspired to pull him toward unconsciousness. His eyes grew heavy. Through the small window, he could see snow falling in thick curtains, the wind driving it sideways. He'd been perhaps an hour away from dying out there, he realized. "Maybe less, thank you," he said quietly, not sure if Marn was even listening. "I mean it. Thank you for opening that door." There was a long pause. When Marn finally spoke, her voice was softer than before, though she didn't look up from her book. "Someone should have opened one for me once. Nobody did. Maybe that's why I opened yours." Albie wanted to ask what she meant, but exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. His head tilted back against the chair, and within moments he was asleep. The last thing he registered was the sound of wind howling around the cabin, and the warmth of the stove, and the presence of another human being in a world that had felt terribly empty for far too long. When he woke, it was dark outside. The cabin was lit by a single kerosene lamp on the table, casting long shadows. Marn was gone from her chair. He heard movement in the loft above, and realized she'd climbed up to sleep, leaving him the chair by the stove. A fresh blanket had been draped over him while he slept. On the floor beside his chair, she'd placed his boots, now dry, and his coat, hung carefully on a peg within reach. The tin cup sat on a small table nearby, refilled with water. Small gestures. Practical kindness from a woman who seemed to have sworn off human contact. Albie pulled the blanket tighter and stared into the glowing window of the wood stove, watching the flames dance. He thought about the carved wooden horse on the shelf, about the hardness in Marn's eyes that didn't quite match the gentleness of her actions, about the way she'd said nobody opened a door for her when she needed it. Two strangers, trapped together by weather and circumstance, both running from something or perhaps running from themselves. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the mountain pass, sealing them into this small space where the past had nowhere to hide, and the future was at least one day away. Albie closed his eyes and listened to the wind. For the first time in months, maybe years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The morning arrived grey and hostile. Albie woke to the sound of Marn already moving about the cabin, stoking the fire, putting coffee on to boil. His body ached in places he'd forgotten existed, and when he tried to flex his fingers, sharp pains shot through them. The frostbite, he realized. Not severe, but enough to remind him how close he'd come. "Coffee's almost ready," Marn said without turning around. "How are the fingers?" "They hurt." "Good. Means they're still alive." She poured 2 cups of black coffee and brought one to him. "Drink this. Then we need to check your feet." The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed. Albie sipped it carefully, watching Marn move through her morning routine with the precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She seemed less guarded this morning, Or perhaps he was just less of an intruder after a night under her roof. Outside, the storm that had been threatening yesterday had arrived in full fury. Wind hammered the cabin, making the walls creak. Snow fell so thickly that the trees 20 yards away were barely visible. Through it all came a sound Albie knew well from his years in the mountains, the deep, ominous moan of a true blizzard settling in. "That's not stopping any time soon," Marn said, following his gaze. She moved to a shelf and pulled down an old transistor radio, the kind with an antenna you had to adjust manually. She fiddled with it until static gave way to a voice. "Winter storm warning remains in effect for the Sawtooth Range and surrounding areas. The National Weather Service has upgraded this to a blizzard warning with sustained winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour and gusts up to 70. Whiteout conditions expected to persist through Tuesday evening, possibly into Wednesday morning. Travel is strongly discouraged. This is a dangerous, life-threatening storm. If you are caught outside," Marn clicked it off. Tuesday evening. "Today's Sunday. We're looking at 2 full days, maybe 3. Albie set down his coffee cup. "I'm sorry to impose on you that long. Can't be helped." She crouched down in front of him. "Let me see those feet." He pulled off his socks, thick wool ones that Marn must have put on him while he slept, and Marn examined his toes with the same clinical detachment she'd shown his fingers. Her touch was gentle but firm, checking for sensation, for color, for signs of serious damage. "You'll keep them," she said finally. "Going to hurt for a few days, though. No walking unless you have to. I can't just sit here for 3 days. "Yes, you can. That's exactly what you'll do." She stood and moved back to the kitchen area. "I've got enough supplies. We'll ration if we need to, but we won't starve. Question is whether we can stand each other that long." It was meant as a joke, Albie thought, though Marn's delivery was so dry it was hard to tell. He managed a small smile. "I'll try not to be too much trouble. Already said you'd be some trouble. Just keep it to some, and we'll manage." The day crawled forward with the strange timelessness that comes from being trapped inside during a storm. Marn went through her routines, checking the stove, organizing supplies, reading. Albie sat mostly still, trying not to feel like a burden. By afternoon, his body had thawed enough that the deeper aches set in, along with a fever that made him shiver despite the warmth of the cabin. "Exposure," Marn said, feeling his forehead with the back of her hand. "Your body's been through hell. It's trying to fight back." She brought him more blankets, more warm liquids. As the fever climbed, Albie's mind began to drift. He was no longer entirely sure where he was, in the cabin, on the railroad, in the house where he'd raised Lily, in the hospital where Margaret died. All of it blurred together in a feverish haze. "Lily," he heard himself say, though he wasn't sure he'd meant to speak out loud. "I'm sorry, Lily. I should have been there." From somewhere far away, he heard Marn's voice. "Who's Lily?" "My daughter." The words came easier in delirium than they ever had in consciousness. "She tried. She really tried to keep me in her life, but I was angry. So angry all the time. At myself, I think, for being a poor father. And I took it out on her. I told her, God help me, I told her she wasn't worth my time if she couldn't respect me." His voice broke. Tears leaked from his closed eyes. "She died 3 months later. Surgery gone wrong. She was 38 years old. And the last thing I ever said to her was that she wasn't worth my time." Strong hands gripped his shoulders. Marn's voice, closer now, quieter. "Easy, you're here now. You're safe." "I had a granddaughter," Albie continued, unable to stop the confession now that it had started. "Never met her. Don't even know her name. Lily wanted me to know her, but I was too proud. Too hurt, and now it's too late. It's all too late." Through the fever, he felt Marn's hand on his forehead, cool and steady. "Sleep," she said. "Just sleep now." But sleep wouldn't come easily. The fever held him in its grip through the afternoon and into the evening. At some point, he was vaguely aware of Marn changing the cool cloth on his forehead, bringing him water, adjusting his blankets. She spoke to him occasionally, words he couldn't quite make out, but the tone was gentle, almost maternal. Night fell. The storm raged on. In his fevered state, Albie dreamed of Margaret, of Lily as a child, of train tracks stretching endlessly into darkness. He dreamed of knocking on a door that wouldn't open, of calling out to people who couldn't hear him, of slowly freezing while the world moved on without him. When he finally woke fully, it was deep night. The cabin was lit only by the glow from the stove's window. Marn sat in her chair across from him, not reading, just sitting, watching. Her face was shadowed, impossible to read. "How long?" Albie asked, his voice raspy. "Since the fever broke?" "About an hour." "You were out of your head most of the day. Did I say anything?" He stopped, remembering fragments. His daughter's name. The confession about his failures. "I'm sorry. You didn't need to hear all that." Marn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "I lost people too. A long time ago. Sometimes I think that's why I came up here, so I wouldn't have to explain it to anyone. So I wouldn't have to see the pity in their eyes, or the judgment." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the storm. "You said your daughter's name was Lily?" "Yes." "And you have a granddaughter you've never met?" "Yes. That can be fixed, you know." "She's still out there. You're still here." Albie absorbed this, the simple truth of it. What if she doesn't want to know me? What if too much time has passed? What if she does want to know you and you never tried? Marn turned from the window. What if you spend the rest of your life wondering, and you die with that wonder still burning in you? It was the longest speech she'd made since he'd arrived. The passion in it surprised him, and seemed to surprise her too, because she immediately retreated. "Not my business. Forget I said anything." "No." Albie pushed himself more upright in the chair, ignoring the ache in his body. "You're right. I know you're right. I've known it for 8 years. But knowing something and doing something are different things. Always are." Marn returned to her chair. "Storm's going to last at least another day. We're stuck here together. Might as well be honest with each other since there's nowhere else to go." "All right. Then I'll ask you the same question. Why are you up here? What happened that made you choose this?" Marn's jaw tightened. For a moment Albie thought she wouldn't answer. Then she reached up and touched something at her throat. A chain, he realized, disappearing beneath her shirt collar. "I was driving," she said quietly. 11 years ago. Mountain road, winter storm, not as bad as this one, but bad enough. I thought I could make it. I was wrong." She fell silent. Albie waited, understanding that this was a gift she was offering, this small piece of her story. "My husband was in the passenger seat. My son was in the back. Jamie, he was 7 years old." Her voice remained steady, but only barely. "We went off the road. Marcus died on impact. Jamie," she paused, breathing carefully. "Jamie died 3 hours later while we waited for rescue. I held him. There was nothing I could do. The cabin was absolutely still, except for the wind outside and the crackle of the fire." Albie felt his chest constrict with recognition, the particular grief of losing a child, even if he'd lost his in a different way. "I'm sorry," he said. The words inadequate but sincere. After the funerals, people tried to help, to comfort me. But all I could see in their eyes was the question they wouldn't ask. Why didn't I wait? Why did I think I could drive through that storm? Why did I risk my family? She looked at him directly now. "I came up here because I couldn't stand to see that question anymore. And because I didn't deserve to be around people who were whole." "That's not true, isn't it? I killed my family because I was too stubborn to wait out a storm. I don't get to just move on from that. You had an accident. That's all. A terrible accident. Tell that to my son." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to draw blood. "Tell that to Marcus." Albie understood then. Understood why she was here, alone, year after year. She hadn't come to the mountain to heal. She'd come to punish herself. This cabin, this isolation, it was a prison she'd built with her own hands. "Someone should have opened a door for you," Albie said softly, echoing what she'd said the night before. "Someone should have told you that grief and guilt aren't the same thing. That surviving doesn't make you guilty." Easy words. True words. He paused. "I'm a hypocrite saying them. I've spent years punishing myself too, pushing away my daughter because I knew I'd failed her. Refusing to meet my granddaughter because I was afraid she'd see what a poor excuse for a grandfather I'd be. We're both doing the same thing, aren't we? Living like we've already died." Marn turned away again, but not before he saw the shine of tears in her eyes. "Storm's still blowing. We should try to sleep. It was a clear end to the conversation, a door closing. But something had shifted between them. Two strangers had become something more, witnesses to each other's private grief. Companions in a shared understanding of what it meant to carry unbearable weight. As Albie settled back into his blankets and Marn climbed to her loft, the storm outside reached a new pitch of fury. They were trapped here, together, with nowhere to hide from their own stories. And perhaps, Albie thought as sleep finally claimed him, that was exactly what they both needed. The second day of the storm arrived with a strange quiet. The wind had died down to a steady murmur, but the snow continued falling in heavy, relentless curtains. Inside the cabin, a fragile routine began to form. Albie woke before dawn to find Marn already up, moving about the kitchen area with practiced efficiency. His fever had broken completely during the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. His fingers and toes still ached, but the pain was manageable now, a reminder of survival rather than a threat to it. "Morning," Marn said without turning around. "Coffee's ready." "How do you feel?" "Better." "Weak but better." "Good, because you're going to help today." Albie pushed himself upright, surprised. "I thought you wanted me to stay still. That was when you had a fever. Now you're just recovery week, and sitting around won't help that." She brought him coffee and a plate of cornmeal mush, sweetened with a spoonful of precious honey. "After you eat, you're going to split kindling. Small pieces. Nothing that'll stress those fingers too much. We need to keep the fire going, and my supply's running lower than I'd like." It was a gift, Albie realized. Not just the work itself, but the dignity of being useful, of not being merely a burden. "Yes, Mom," he caught himself. "I mean, all right." The corner of Marn's mouth twitched in what might have been almost a smile. "You're learning." They ate in companionable silence, the morning routine unfolding with the kind of ease that usually took weeks to develop. Albie found himself studying Marn when she wasn't looking. The efficient way she moved, the careful rationing of supplies, the small habits that spoke of years alone. She was a woman who'd learned to need no one, and the armor of that self-sufficiency was thick and well-maintained. After breakfast, Marn showed him to a small workbench near the door where she kept her tools. An axe, a hatchet, several knives in various states of sharpness, a whetstone. She handed him the hatchet and pointed to a box of split wood. "Take the smaller pieces. Split them down to kindling. Work slow. Your hands aren't ready for speed." Albie settled onto a three-legged stool and began the work. The first few strikes sent jolts of pain through his damaged fingers, but he gritted his teeth and continued. There was a meditative quality to the repetitive motion, choosing a piece, setting it on the chopping block, bringing the hatchet down in a controlled arc. The wood split cleanly, the fresh-cut surfaces pale against the weathered bark. Marn worked nearby, mending what looked like a pack harness for her mule. The leather was old and cracked in places, but her stitches were neat and strong. She worked with the focus of someone who'd learned that everything must be maintained, that nothing could be wasted or carelessly broken. "You're good at that," Albie said after a while. "Had to learn. Up here, if something breaks and you can't fix it, you do without. How long did you say you've been here?" "Didn't say." "But it's been 12 years. Albie did the math silently. That meant she'd come up here when she was 46, 47, still young enough to have rebuilt a life somewhere else. Old enough that starting over would have been hard. You ever think about going back down? To a town, I mean. Every day for the first 5 years." She pulled her stitch tight, testing the strength. "Then one day I realized I'd stopped thinking about it. This was just my life now. Don't you get lonely?" Marn's hand stilled on the leather. "Lonely's better than hurt. Up here I can't hurt anyone, can't make mistakes that cost lives, but you also can't live. I'm alive, aren't I?" "Are you?" The question hung in the air between them. Marn's jaw tightened, and for a moment Albie thought he'd pushed too far. But then she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I don't know anymore. Maybe I stopped being alive 11 years ago and just haven't noticed yet." Albie set down the hatchet and looked at her directly. "I know that feeling. After Margaret died, that's my wife, after she died, I kept working, kept moving, but I wasn't really there. I was just going through the motions. And when Lily tried to pull me back into life, into her life, I resented her for it. Because I'd gotten comfortable being numb. How'd you stop being numb? I didn't, not really. I just replaced it with different kinds of pain. He picked up another piece of wood. But lately, these last few months, out there in the cold and the hunger, I've been thinking that maybe numbness and pain aren't the only options. Maybe there's something else, something I haven't tried yet. Like what? Like actually dealing with things. Like admitting I was wrong. Like trying to make amends, even if it's too late for some things. Marn resumed her stitching. Is that why you were wandering around in a blizzard? Making amends? No, I was running. Same as you, just with different geography. He split another piece of kindling. But almost dying has a way of clearing your head. Makes you realize that running doesn't actually take you anywhere. They worked in silence for a while, the cabin filled with the sounds of hatchet on wood and needle through leather. Outside, the snow continued its relentless accumulation. Inside, something was accumulating too. A fragile understanding between two people who'd chosen exile and were beginning to question that choice. Tell me about your railroad work, Marn said eventually. You said you did it for 40 years? Albie felt a warmth spread through his chest. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him about his work with genuine interest. 43 years, actually. Started when I was 19, right after I married Margaret. Worked track maintenance first, hard labor, all weather, low pay. But I loved it. Loved being outside, loved the teamwork, loved knowing that the work we did mattered. Those trains carried everything, people. Goods, mail. We kept them running safe. How'd you end up as a foreman? Worked my way up. Learned everything I could. Took night classes in civil engineering. By the time I was 35, I was running crews of 20, 30 men. We'd go out for weeks at a time, living in camp cars, working whatever section of track needed attention. He paused, remembering. Those were good years. Hard work, but good. I felt like I mattered. What changed? I don't know exactly. Somewhere along the way, the work became everything. It was easier to focus on track and ties than it was to focus on my family. Easier to solve problems with steel and wood than to solve problems with people. He shook his head. Margaret tried to tell me. Lily tried to tell me. But I couldn't hear it. Or wouldn't. Marn nodded slowly, her hands still working the leather. I was a teacher. 4th grade, 22 years in the same school. I loved those kids. Loved watching them learn, watching them grow. Her voice softened with memory. Jamie was in my class the year before the accident. I'd taken a leave that year to be home with him more. Marcus thought we should travel, show Jamie the country. So we did, and on the way back, she stopped, unable to finish. But she didn't need to. Albie understood. I never went back to teaching, Marn continued. Couldn't face those kids, those families. Couldn't stand to be responsible for anyone's child ever again. That's a lot of kids who missed out on a good teacher. Better they missed out on me than I let them down. You don't know you would have. I know I let my own son down. That's enough, Albie wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he recognized the futility of it. You couldn't argue someone out of grief, couldn't logic away guilt. He knew because he'd carried his own for long enough to understand its weight. Instead, he returned to the kindling, and Marn returned to her stitching, and they sat together in the warm cabin while the storm raged on outside. Two people who'd chosen to disappear from the world, slowly discovering that being invisible didn't make you gone. It just made you lonely. By afternoon, Albie had split enough kindling to fill 2 large baskets. His hands ached, but it was the good ache of work accomplished. Marn had finished the harness repair and moved on to checking her supplies, taking inventory with the careful precision of someone who knew that waste could mean the difference between survival and suffering. We're all right for food, she announced. Plenty of dried beans, some rice, canned goods. I was planning to resupply next month, but we can stretch what's here. I'll pay you back, Albie said. However I can. You're splitting my kindling. That's payment enough. That evening, Marn made a simple stew with dried venison, potatoes, and carrots from her root cellar. They ate at the table this time, facing each other, the formality of their first day giving way to something more relaxed. Not quite friendship, but not quite strangers anymore either. Thank you, Albie said, for letting me help today. I know I'm still recovering, but it felt good to be useful. Marn nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement that didn't require words. In the lamplight, her face seemed softer than it had before, or perhaps he was just seeing her more clearly. She was a handsome woman, despite the weathering of years and grief. Strong-featured, intelligent eyes, the kind of face that suggested depth of character. "Storm should break tomorrow," she said. "Radio said so anyway. After that, we'll see about getting you down to town. You'll need supplies, a warm place to stay, while you figure out your next move." "What's your next move?" Albie asked. Marn was quiet for a long moment. "Same as it's been for 12 years, I suppose. Winter here, wait for spring, repeat. That's not a move. That's just standing still. Maybe standing still is all I can manage. I don't believe that. Not after these 2 days." She met his eyes across the table. "What's changed in 2 days?" "You let someone in. That's something." Marn looked away, but not before he saw the flicker of something in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "One person, one storm, doesn't mean anything's different, doesn't it?" She didn't answer, just stood and collected their plates. But as she turned away, Albie saw her hand move unconsciously to the locket at her throat, and he understood that something was shifting, however slightly. For both of them, the third day dawned with a change in the air. The storm hadn't fully broken, but its fury had diminished to a steady, almost gentle snowfall. Albie woke to find Marn already checking the firewood supply outside, her figure visible through the window as she moved between the cabin and the woodshed. When she came back in, stamping snow from her boots, her expression was serious. "We're getting low on split wood. The shed's well stocked, but we need to bring more in and let it dry by the stove." "Can't burn it wet. I can help," Albie offered, already standing. "Not with those hands." "Not yet." She pulled off her outer layers. "But if the snow keeps easing like this, we'll need to make the trip together tomorrow. Can't risk going alone in case the weather turns again." The morning coffee ritual had become familiar now, almost comfortable. Albie found himself settling into the rhythm of Marn's life, the careful conservation of resources, the methodical attention to small tasks, the long silences that weren't uncomfortable so much as contemplative. "Can I ask you something?" Albie said as they sat with their coffee. "You're going to whether I say yes or not." "Fair point." He smiled slightly. "Do you ever get lonely up here?" "Really lonely?" Marn considered the question, her fingers wrapped around her cup. "Lonely's better than hurt." "I think I said that already." "You did. But is it true?" She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee as if the answer might be floating there. "For the first few years I was so numb I couldn't tell the difference. Lonely, hurt, alive, dead, it all felt the same. Then one morning I woke up and realized I was talking to Greta like she was a person, having full conversations with a mule." She paused. "That's when I knew I'd crossed some line. But by then, I didn't know how to cross back. What kept you from trying?" "Fear, mostly. Of going back down there and seeing people who knew what happened. Of trying to be normal again and failing. Of hurting someone else because I'd proven I couldn't be trusted with anything precious." She set down her cup. "Up here, the only thing I can hurt is myself. That feels safer, but lonely, she agreed. "Though lately, these past 2 days, it's been different. Having someone else here talking, even arguing." She glanced at him. "I'd forgotten what it was like. What was like. Being seen. Really seen, not just glanced at in passing. You can't hide who you are when you're stuck in a cabin with someone for 3 days? There's nowhere to put the mask." Albie nodded slowly. "I've been wearing a mask so long, I'm not sure what my real face looks like anymore. Angry at the world, pushing everyone away, pretending it was their fault instead of mine." He flexed his damaged fingers carefully. "But you're right. Can't hide in close quarters. Can't pretend you're someone you're not. So who are you, Albie Trenner?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked him that? When was the last time he'd asked himself? "I'm a man who worked hard his whole life and forgot what he was working for," he said finally. "A man who loved his family, but didn't know how to show it. A man who made mistakes and then ran from them instead of facing them." He paused. A man who almost died in the snow and is trying to figure out if he wants a second chance. Do you? I think so. Yeah, I think I do. Marn stood and moved to the window, looking out at the softly falling snow. I used to tell my students that it's never too late to try again. That mistakes are just lessons waiting to be learned. I believed it too back then. Her voice grew softer. But then I made a mistake that couldn't be fixed. A lesson that cost everything. It was an accident, Marn. You didn't choose what happened, but I chose to drive in that storm. Marcus wanted to wait. He said we should stay another night, that the roads would be dangerous. But I was stubborn. I said we'd be fine, that I'd driven mountain roads in winter before. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. I made a choice, and 2 people died because of it. Albie joined her at the window. I made a choice too. When Lily reached out to me, when she asked me to meet my granddaughter, I chose pride over family. I chose my hurt feelings over the chance to know my daughter's child. And 3 months later, Lily was gone. That was my choice, and I have to live with it. So how do you live with it? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. He turned to face her. But I know I can't do it by hiding. Can't do it by punishing myself. That doesn't honor Lily's memory. It doesn't help my granddaughter. It just makes me another casualty of my own stubbornness. Marn turned from the window, and he saw tears glinting in her eyes. I wear this, she said, pulling the silver locket from beneath her shirt collar. She opened it, revealing 2 small photographs, a man with kind eyes and a laughing boy. Marcus and Jamie, I wear it every day. Some days I look at it and feel nothing but guilt. Other days I look at it and remember how much I loved them. But I never take it off. Why not? Because if I take it off, I might forget. Not them, I could never forget them. But I might forget the weight of what I did. And I need to remember that weight. It's all I have left of them. That's not all you have. You have their love. You have the years you shared. You have the good you did as a mother and a wife. Albie reached out slowly, carefully, and touched the locket with 1 finger. This is beautiful, but it's not a penance. It's a memory. There's a difference. Marn closed the locket and tucked it back under her shirt. I'm not sure I know that difference anymore. Then maybe we both need to learn. The conversation hung between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Outside, the snow continued its gentle fall. Softer now, the sky beginning to show hints of brightness where the clouds were thinning. That afternoon, Marn surprised him by pulling down a wooden box from a high shelf. Inside were books, worn paperbacks, their spines creased and covers faded. She set the box between them. Pick one, she said. Reading helps pass the time. Albie sorted through them. Steinbeck, McCarthy, Annie Prulocks, Barbara Kingsolver. Serious literature, books that dealt with hard truths and harder lives. Oh, you've got good taste, he said. Had a lot of time to read. She pulled out a battered copy of Lonesome Dove. This was Marcus's favorite. He read it 3 times. Said it was about men trying to find meaning in movement, in doing something big before they died. Have you read it? 5 times. Once before the accident, 4 times after. She opened it, and a pressed wildflower fell out, purple, perfectly preserved. Jamie picked this. Our last camping trip together. He said it was for his mom, to remember the good day. Albie picked up the flower carefully, its papery petals delicate as moth wings. He loved you. I know he did. That's what makes it so hard. He trusted me completely, and I let him down. No, you were in an accident. There's a difference between making a mistake and being untrustworthy. Marn took the flower back and pressed it between the pages again. Is there? Feels the same from where I'm sitting. That's because you've been sitting in the same place for 12 years. Albie picked up East of Eden, felt its familiar weight. Maybe it's time to stand up and look around. See if the view's different from a new angle. Easy to say, true to say. He opened the book, finding comfort in the smell of old paper. Neither of us can change what happened, but we can change what happens next. That's not nothing. Marn settled back with Lonesome Dove, but Albie noticed she wasn't really reading, just holding the book like an anchor. After a few minutes she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd forgotten how to talk like this. How to have a real conversation, not just words exchanged in passing. How to let someone see the broken parts and not turn away. I haven't turned away? Not yet, not ever. Albie set down his own book. Because I've got broken parts too, we all do. That's what makes us human. Is that what makes us human? Being broken? No, being broken is just part of it. What makes us human is trying to heal anyway, trying to connect anyway, trying to love anyway, even when we know love can hurt us. Marn closed her book and looked at him, really looked at him. And Albie saw something shift in her expression, a softening, a thawing, like ice beginning to melt at winter's end. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for not letting me hide, for reminding me that I'm still alive, even when I wasn't sure I wanted to be." The words hit Albie with unexpected force. He realized that she'd done the same for him, pulled him in from the cold, fed him, tended him, listened to his confessions without judgment. They'd saved each other in ways that went beyond shelter and food. "We're still alive," he said, "both of us. The question is what we do with that. I don't know yet. That's okay. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." Outside, the snow had stopped completely. Through the window, patches of blue sky were visible between the breaking clouds. The storm was ending. Tomorrow they would leave the cabin, descend the mountain, return to a world that had moved on without them. But tonight they sat together in the lamplight. Two people who'd chosen exile, discovering that isolation was just another kind of prison. And in discovering that, they'd found something neither had expected. Not romance, not redemption exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something like hope. Marn touched her locket one more time, then let her hand fall away. "Storm's breaking," she said. "It is," Albie agreed, and neither of them was talking about the weather. The fourth morning arrived clear and cold. The storm finally spent. Sunlight poured through the cabin windows with startling brightness, reflecting off snow that had piled 3 feet deep in places. The world outside looked newly made, pristine and untouched. "We need to get that firewood," Marn said, as they finished their morning coffee, "while the weather holds." "Can you make it?" Albie tested his feet, flexing his toes inside the thick wool socks. The pain had dulled to a manageable ache. His fingers were stiff but functional. "I can make it." "Good, bundle up. It's colder than it looks out there." They dressed in layers, Marn loaning him an extra coat that had belonged to Marcus, too large in the shoulders but warm. She handed him heavy gloves, a wool hat and a scarf. "Keep your face covered. Frostbite doesn't need a second invitation." The woodshed stood about 50 yards from the cabin, a simple structure that leaned slightly to one side, but had weathered decades of mountain winters. The path between cabin and shed was buried under fresh snow, and they had to break trail with each step. Greta stood in her small shelter nearby, watching them with patient brown eyes. "Morning, old girl," Marn said to the mule, stopping to stroke her neck. "We'll get you fed after this." The cold was shocking after days in the cabin's warmth. It hit Albie's lungs like a fist, made his eyes water, but there was something invigorating about it too, the clean bite of winter air, the brilliant sun, the absolute silence of the snow-covered mountain. Inside the shed, Marn had stacked wood with the precision of an engineer, different sizes sorted and organized, everything accessible despite the cramped space. They worked in tandem, loading their arms with split pieces, carrying them back to the cabin, stacking them near the stove to dry. On their third trip, Albie's foot slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. He windmilled his arms, trying to catch his balance, but gravity and momentum won. He went down hard on his side, his armload of wood scattering across the snow. Marn was there instantly, her hand gripping his arm, pulling him up with surprising strength. "You all right?" "Just my pride," Albie said, brushing snow from his clothes. But his hip throbbed where he'd landed, and his damaged fingers had taken another jolt. "That's enough for you. Go inside, warm up. I'll finish. I can help. You can help by not making yourself worse." Her tone was firm but not unkind. "Go on. I've been doing this alone for years. I can manage," Albie wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility of it. And truth be told, his body was screaming for rest. He gathered the scattered wood and carried it back to the cabin, then settled by the stove while Marn finished the work alone. Through the window, He watched her move between shed and cabin with steady determination. She was strong, not just physically, though that was evident, but in a deeper way. She'd survived up here alone, through who knew how many winters, through loneliness and grief and the constant demands of self-sufficiency. That took a kind of strength most people never had to develop. When she finally came back inside, her cheeks were flushed from exertion and cold. She stripped off her outer layers and poured herself coffee from the pot that had been keeping warm on the stove. "All done," she said. "Should last us another week if we're careful. I'm sorry I couldn't finish helping. You helped plenty." She settled into her chair, cradling the coffee cup. "More than I've had in a long time." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, letting the warmth of the cabin seep back into their bones. Outside, the sun continued its arc across the clear blue sky. It was beautiful, Albie thought. Beautiful and utterly indifferent to human struggle. "Tell me about him," Albie said eventually. "Your son, Jamie." Marn's hands tightened around her cup. For a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she took a slow breath and began to speak. He was 7. Just barely 7. We'd had his birthday party 2 weeks before the accident. Her voice was steady, but Albie could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. He was curious about everything, always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? How do birds know where to go? What happens to water when it freezes? It drove me crazy sometimes, all those questions. But I loved it too. Loved seeing his mind work. He sounds special. He was. Smart, funny, fearless in the way only children can be fearless. She smiled slightly, lost in memory. He wanted to be a scientist, or a park ranger, or maybe a teacher like his mom. It changed every week, but whatever it was, he was absolutely certain that's what he'd do. Did he look like you or Marcus? Marcus. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same crooked smile. She pulled out the locket, opened it, showed him the photograph again. See, all Marcus. Except his stubbornness, that was all me. Albie studied the photograph more carefully this time. The boy did look like his father, but Albie could see Marn in the shape of his face, the set of his jaw. He looks happy. He was. We all were. She closed the locket. That's what makes it so hard to bear. We were happy. Not perfect, not without problems, but genuinely happy. And then one stupid decision. She stopped, unable to continue. Albie reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something he'd been carrying for 30 years. A rusted railroad spike, bent at the top where a sledgehammer had missed its mark. "See this?" He held it out. December 14th, 1994. We were replacing rail on a stretch outside Pocatello. Cold day, wind blowing hard. I was foreman, responsible for the crew. I made a call to keep working instead of breaking for shelter. Told the men we'd finish the section and then take lunch. He turned the spike over in his hands, feeling its rough texture. 2 men died that day. Young guys, early 20s. One of them had a baby daughter he'd never seen. His wife was due in 2 weeks. The other was engaged to be married in the spring. They died because I pushed too hard, because I wanted to finish the section, because I was too stubborn to admit the conditions were too dangerous. Marn's eyes widened. What happened? Rail slipped during placement. Crushed both of them before anyone could react. Investigation called it an accident, said it could have happened any time. But I knew I'd pushed too hard. I knew those men died because of my decision, but it wasn't murder. It was an accident. So was yours. Albie set the spike on the small table between them. But knowing that doesn't make the weight any lighter, does it? Doesn't stop you from carrying it every day. "No," Marn whispered. "It doesn't. I carried this spike for 30 years, kept it in my pocket like a stone, pulled it out every time I started to feel happy or content, reminded myself I didn't deserve those feelings. Pushed away my wife, my daughter, anyone who might care about me, because those 2 young men didn't get to have wives or daughters or happy lives, so why should I? Why are you telling me this? Because I'm starting to understand something. We can't bring them back. Your family, those young men on my crew, my daughter. We can't undo what happened. The guilt we carry, it doesn't honor them. It just makes us another casualty." Marn stood abruptly and moved to the window. "You don't understand. If I stop feeling guilty, if I stop punishing myself, Then what was it all for? What does their death mean if I just move on? It means they lived. It means they were loved. It means their lives mattered, not just their deaths. Albie picked up the spike again. This piece of metal, it's not those men. They were more than the moment they died, and your family was more than the accident. They were years of love and joy and ordinary moments. That's what you should carry, not just the end. I don't know how to do that, neither do I, but I'm starting to think that maybe we can't do it alone. Maybe we need someone else to remind us when we forget. Someone who understands. Marn turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. I loved them so much. Marcus and Jamie. I loved them more than anything. And I killed them. You had an accident. You didn't kill them. There's a difference. Tell me the difference then. Because I can't see it. Albie stood and crossed to her. He didn't touch her, didn't embrace her. That would have been too much. But he stood close, solid and present. The difference is intent. The difference is that you loved them and wanted to protect them and would have given your life for theirs if you could. The difference is that you were a good mother and a good wife who made one mistake in a lifetime of right choices. And that one mistake, it doesn't erase everything else. It erased them. No, death erased them. Time erased them. But love doesn't erase. Love persists. And the fact that you're still here, still feeling, still hurting, that means the love persists too. Marn covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs she'd held back for 11 years. Albie stood beside her, waiting, present, letting her grief pour out in the safety of someone who understood its weight. When she finally quieted, she lowered her hands and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. I've been up here for 12 years. 12 years without crying. I thought if I didn't cry, if I stayed numb, it wouldn't hurt so much. But it still hurts. God, it still hurts. It always will. But maybe the hurt can share space with other things, with memories that aren't just about the end, with life that still wants to be lived. Marn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You really think you can reach your granddaughter? After all this time? I don't know. But I'm going to try. Because she deserves to know I tried. And because I need to know I tried. What if she rejects you? Then at least I'll know. At least I won't die wondering what might have been. He paused. What about you? What will you do? I don't know. Going back down there, facing people, trying to be normal again, it terrifies me. Being terrified is different from being unable. You're strong, Marn, stronger than you think. You've survived up here alone for 12 years. That takes more strength than most people have. Or more cowardice. No, cowardice would have been giving up entirely. You didn't give up. You just stopped moving forward. There's a difference. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're full of differences today. Just trying to figure things out. Same as you. Outside, the sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks. The light turned golden, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose. Inside the cabin, two people stood in that golden light. Not quite friends, but more than strangers, bound together by shared grief and the fragile possibility of moving beyond it. Thank you, Marn said finally, for listening, for understanding, for not judging. Thank you for the same, and for opening your door when I needed it most. What happens tomorrow? After the road's clear, we go down. We face whatever comes next, together if you're willing. Marn nodded slowly. Together. God help us both. That evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Marn disappeared into the loft and returned with something wrapped in oiled cloth. She set it on the table between them with careful reverence, then slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a piece of birch bark, about 12 inches square, covered in careful markings made with colored pencils. A child's map, complete with trees drawn as lollipop shapes, a crooked stream, and various spots marked with X's and labels in unsteady letters. Jamie made this, Marn said softly. Our last camping trip together, the summer before it happened. He was so proud of it. Said he was making a treasure map of all the secret places we'd found. Albie leaned closer, studying the careful lines. Eagle nest, said one label. Best fishing spot, said another. Mom's favorite tree was marked with a heart. In the corner, in larger letters, Jamie had written, "Our mountain. Summer forever. Love, Jamie?" "He loved these mountains," Marn continued, her finger tracing the stream Jamie had drawn. "Loved camping, hiking, exploring. Every weekend we'd pack up and come out here. Marcus would fish while Jamie and I looked for interesting rocks or tracked animals. Those were the best days. This cabin, is this where you'd camp?" "No, we had a spot about 5 miles south. But after I couldn't stay in town anymore, I remembered this old cabin. An uncle of Marcus's had built it decades ago, used it for hunting. It had been empty for years, but the bones were good. So I came here, as close to those happy memories as I could get without being overwhelmed by them." Albie understood the logic of it, the way grief made you seek proximity to what you'd lost, while simultaneously keeping you at a safe distance. "Do you ever go to that camping spot? The one Jamie loved?" "No, I tried once, maybe 3 years after I came here. Got halfway there and turned back. It was too much." She carefully rewrapped the birch bark. "But I keep this. Look at it sometimes. Try to remember the good days before I ruined everything. You didn't ruin everything. You had an accident. So you keep saying, because it's true." Albie pulled out his railroad pocket watch, the one that had stopped at 3:47. "You want to know something? For 20 years, I looked at this watch every day, sometimes multiple times. It became a ritual of self-punishment. But today, looking at it, I realized something different." "What's that?" "That 3:47 was when my daughter was born. That was a moment of pure joy, one of the best moments of my life. And yeah, it's also when I learned she died. But the joy came first. The joy is what the time really means. The rest, that's just what I chose to attach to it." Marn absorbed this, her hand resting on the wrapped birch bark. "You think I should remember the camping trip instead of the accident?" "I think you should remember both. But give weight to the years of love, not just the moment of loss. Easier said than done. Most true things are." Marn stood and moved to the small shelf where the carved wooden horse sat. She took it down carefully, dust motes dancing in the lamplight as she brought it to the table. "Marcus made this for Jamie's 5th birthday. Spent weeks on it, carving every detail. Jamie slept with it every night for 2 years. The horse was beautifully crafted, the musculature accurate, the mane flowing, the posture suggesting motion. Marcus had been an artist in wood. "It's beautiful," Albie said. "Jamie named him Thunder. Said he was the fastest horse in the world, faster than lightning, faster than the wind." She smiled at the memory, and for the first time since Albie had met her, the smile reached her eyes. He'd gallop Thunder across the furniture, through the house, narrating epic adventures. Marcus and I would hear him in his room at night talking to Thunder, telling him secrets and dreams. Sounds like he had a good imagination. The best. That's part of what makes losing him so hard. All that potential, all those dreams he'd never get to chase. The scientist or park ranger or teacher he'd never become. The man he'd never grow into. But he was a boy who was loved completely, who knew joy and adventure and security. Not every child gets that. I know how lucky we were for the time we had. But it doesn't feel like enough. It never feels like enough. It never will. That's the nature of love. It always wants more time, more moments, more of everything. But that doesn't mean what you had wasn't precious. Marn set the horse back on the shelf, positioning it carefully in its worn spot. When she turned back, her expression had shifted into something resolute. "When we go down tomorrow, I'm going to find a phone. Call the school where I used to teach. See if they need substitute teachers." Albie felt something lift in his chest. "Yeah? Maybe. I don't know if I can do it, step into a classroom again. But I want to try. Or at least I want to try, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And you? What's your first step? Find your son-in-law's number. The one Lily was married to. Call him. Ask if I can meet my granddaughter. Accept whatever answer he gives." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. "Her name's Emma. I know that much from a letter her father sent after Lily died. Emma, my granddaughter Emma. That's a good start. It's the only start I have." They sat together in the lamplight, the cabin warm around them, the night dark beyond the windows. Two people planning to rejoin a world they'd both abandoned, neither sure they had the strength, but both willing to try. "Can I tell you something?" Marn said. "Something I've never said out loud? Of course. Sometimes I'm angry at them, at Marcus and Jamie, for leaving me, for dying and making me live with it. I know it's not fair. I know they didn't choose it, but sometimes the anger is so strong I can barely breathe. That's normal. Grief and anger, they're cousins. You can feel both at once, but I feel guilty for being angry, like it's a betrayal of their memory. It's not. It's just being human." Albie thought about his own anger, at Lily for dying, at Margaret for leaving him, at himself for wasting the time he'd had. Anger's easier than sadness sometimes. It feels more powerful, more in control. But under the anger is usually just hurt, and under the hurt is love. Is that from something, a book? No, just something I figured out by getting it wrong for 20 years. Marn laughed, a real laugh, genuine and warm. "Well, at least your mistakes taught you something. Mine just taught me to hide. They taught you to survive. That's not nothing, maybe, but I'm tired of just surviving. These past few days, talking with you, being seen, I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live, even a little bit. So let's keep living. Down the mountain, in town, wherever we end up. Let's promise each other we'll keep trying, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Marn extended her hand across the table. Albie took it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the slight tremor of fear or determination or both. They shook once, firmly, sealing a pact that neither fully understood, but both desperately needed. "To trying," Marn said. "To trying," Albie echoed, outside. A coyote called to the moon, its voice echoing across the snowy peaks. Inside, two people sat holding hands across a scarred wooden table. Not romantic, but something deeper. Two souls recognizing each other across the distance of their respective griefs. When they finally let go and prepared for sleep, the cabin felt different somehow. Less like a prison, more like a way station. A place to rest before continuing the journey. Not an ending, but a pause before beginning again. Albie settled into his chair by the stove. Marn climbed to her loft, and in the darkness before sleep, both of them thought about tomorrow. About dissent and decision, about facing a world they'd been hiding from, about the terrifying possibility that life might still hold something worth living for. "Albie." Marn's voice came from the loft, soft in the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For knocking on my door. For asking for help. For reminding me I'm still here. Thank you for opening it. For saving my life. For showing me it's still worth saving." Silence settled over the cabin, but it was a comfortable silence. The kind shared by people who'd stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. Broken, afraid, hopeful, human. Tomorrow they would descend. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next. But tonight they rested in the warmth and safety of connection, of being witnessed in their grief and their tentative steps toward healing. The fire burned low in the stove. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in a cabin on a mountain, two people who'd been lost began to find their way back to the land of the living. One small choice at a time, the fifth morning dawned bright and clear. The world outside transformed into a landscape of white and blue and blinding sunlight. Marn was up before first light, preparing for their descent. She moved with purpose, packing supplies, organizing gear, her movements sharp with barely contained nervous energy. Albie woke to find his clothes from that first day, the ones he'd been wearing when he collapsed at her door, laid out and cleaned. The coat had been brushed free of snow and mud, the shirt and trousers washed and dried. Marn had done this while he slept, tending to his things with the same quiet care she'd shown everything else. He was pulling on the shirt when he heard Marn's sharp intake of breath from across the cabin. He turned to find her standing frozen, holding his coat in both hands. Something had fallen from an inner pocket, a faded envelope, yellowed with age. "What is this?" Marn asked, her voice strange. Albie felt his stomach drop. He knew exactly what it was. "Give me that." But Marn was already looking at it, her eyes scanning the childish handwriting on the front. "It's addressed to you. Grandpa Albie," in a child's handwriting. She looked up at him, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. "It's postmarked 8 years ago. Marn, please, you've been carrying a letter from your granddaughter for 8 years. Her voice rose slightly. "An unopened letter from a child who wanted to know you?" Albie crossed the cabin and reached for the envelope, but Marn held it away. "I couldn't," he said. "I couldn't open it. I didn't deserve to read it. That wasn't your choice to make." The anger in her voice surprised them both. "That child, Emma, you said her name was Emma. She wrote to you." She reached out. "And you carried her words around unopened for 8 years? You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Marn's hands were shaking. "You did the same thing I did. You ran, you hid. You decided you weren't worthy of connection, so you denied it to someone who wanted to give it. It's not the same. It's exactly the same." She looked at the envelope again, at the careful loops of a child's writing. "She was 8 years old when she wrote this. 8. And you couldn't even give her the courtesy of reading her words." Albie felt shame wash over him, hot and choking. "I was afraid. Afraid of what she'd say, afraid I'd see Lily in her words, afraid it would hurt too much, so you chose not to feel anything at all. You chose numbness over connection, just like I did." Marn's voice broke slightly. "I've been telling myself for 12 years that I didn't deserve to be around people, that I didn't deserve connection or comfort or anything good. And you've been doing the same thing. We're both cowards." "Yes," the admission came out as a whisper. "Yes, we are. But I'm trying to change that. That's why I was heading south, why I was trying to find a way to contact her, while still carrying her unopened letter." Marn held it out to him. "Open it. I can't open it right now. Because if you're going to talk about trying, about making amends, about reconnecting, then you need to start by reading what she wrote to you 8 years ago." Albie's hands trembled as he took the envelope. The paper was soft with age, the edges worn from 8 years in his pocket. He'd carried it across 3 states, through countless nights in shelters and missions and cold railroad camps. But he'd never once broken the seal. "I don't know if I can." Marn's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Then I'll read it to you. But you're going to hear these words. You're going to face what you've been avoiding." She took the envelope back, opened it with careful reverence, and pulled out 2 pieces of paper, a letter in that same childish handwriting and a photograph. Marn looked at the photo first, and her breath caught. "She looks like you," she said quietly, holding it up. Albie forced himself to look. The photograph showed a girl of about 8, standing beside a bicycle with training wheels, grinning at the camera. She had dark hair and pigtails, bright eyes, and Marn was right. She had his chin, his stubborn jaw, even the way she smiled. "That's Emma," he whispered. "That's your granddaughter." Marn set the photo on the table where they could both see it, then unfolded the letter. "Ready?" Albie nodded, unable to speak. Marn began to read, her voice steady but gentle. "Dear Grandpa Albie, my name is Emma. I am your granddaughter. I am 8 years old. My dad said I could write to you because I have questions. Mom said you worked on trains. That sounds cool. I like trains. There's one that goes through our town every day at 3 o'clock, and I count the cars. The most I counted was 47. Do you know how long trains can be? Mom told me stories about when she was little. She said you taught her to identify birds and that you could fix anything. She said you worked really hard. She said she missed you. I miss her. Mom died last year. Dad says she got sick during surgery and didn't wake up. It was an accident. I didn't get to say goodbye. Mom said you're sad. I get sad too sometimes. Really sad, like there's a hole in my chest. Dad says it's okay to be sad, and that Mom would want us to remember the happy times. Do you remember happy times with Mom? Will you tell me about them? Dad says you don't live close to us. That's okay. Maybe we could write letters or talk on the phone. I want to know about trains and birds and fixing things. I want to know about Mom when she was my age. If you don't want to, that's okay too. But I wanted to try. Love, Emma P.S. The picture is me with my new bike. I learned to ride without training wheels last month. Marn's voice cracked on the last line. She folded the letter carefully and set it beside the photograph. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. When Albie finally found his voice, It was thick with tears. She wanted to know about her mother, about me, about trains and birds, and he couldn't continue. And you carried this for 8 years without reading it. Marn's anger had transformed into something else. Sadness, maybe, or disappointment. She reached out. A grieving 8-year-old child reached out to her only living grandparent, and you couldn't even open the letter. I know. Albie picked up the photograph, his hands shaking. I know what I did. I know what I failed to do. She said she gets sad, that it feels like a hole in her chest. Marn's voice was quiet now. She was 8 years old and feeling what we feel. And we're grown adults who should know better. You're right. Albie looked at the picture, at Emma's smile, at the pride in her stance beside her bicycle. About everything. I've been a coward. Worse than a coward. I've been selfish. This child needed me, needed connection, needed to know about her mother, and I was too wrapped up in my own guilt to give her that. So what are you going to do about it? What can I do? She's 16 now. 8 years have passed. What if she doesn't even remember writing this? What if she's given up on me? Then you try anyway. You read this letter, you face what you avoided, and you try to make it right, even if it's too late, even if she rejects you. You owe her that. Albie read the letter again himself this time, Emma's words burning into his consciousness. The questions about trains, the mention of his daughter saying he was sad, the gentle invitation, if you don't want to, that's okay too. But I wanted to try. She'd been braver than him. An 8-year-old child had been braver than a 72-year-old man. I'm going down that mountain, Albie said, his voice stronger now. I'm going to find a phone. I'm going to call her father, David, I think his name was. And I'm going to ask for the chance to meet Emma, to answer her questions, to tell her about her mother. To try, Marn echoed. That's all any of us can do. They stood together in the cabin, the letter and photograph between them, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The past couldn't be changed, the letters couldn't be unwritten or reread in time, but the future was still unfolding, still open to possibility. Come with me, Albie said suddenly. Down the mountain, to town, to Denver if that's where Emma is. Come with me. He paused, searching for words. I need someone who understands. Someone who won't let me run again. Someone who's trying too. Marn looked at him for a long moment. You really mean that? I do. We've helped each other here. Maybe we can keep helping each other out there. I don't know her. She's your family. You're my family too now. You pulled me in from the cold. You fed me. You listened to my confessions. You made me read this letter when I was too afraid to do it alone. He gestured to the photograph. That's family. Not blood, maybe, but family nonetheless. Marn's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. For people, for the world, for trying to be normal again. I don't know if I am either. But we can find out together. She looked around the cabin, her refuge, her prison, her home for 12 years. Then she looked back at Albie, at the letter, at the photograph of a girl with his chin and her mother's eyes. All right, she said finally. All right. We'll go down together. We'll try together. And if we fail, we'll fail together. That's better than failing alone. Marn nodded slowly, then moved to pack her own belongings. As she worked, Albie carefully folded Emma's letter and put it back in the envelope along with the photograph. This time, he put it in his shirt pocket over his heart, where it should have been all along. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the snow in bright rivulets. Inside, 2 people prepared to leave their exile behind, to face the world they'd been hiding from, to answer letters that should have been read years ago. The cabin on the mountain had served its purpose. It had kept them alive through the storm, both the storm outside and the storms within. But now the weather had cleared, and it was time to descend. Time to stop hiding. Time to try. Ready? Marn asked, her pack on her shoulders, her coat buttoned against the cold. Albie touched the envelope over his heart. Ready? They stepped out into the brilliant morning, closing the door of the cabin behind them, and began the long walk down the mountain toward whatever came next. The descent took most of the day. The snow was deep and the footing treacherous, but Marn moved with the confidence of someone who'd walked these slopes for years. Greta followed patiently, picking her way through the drifts with the wisdom of a creature who understood mountain terrain. Albie struggled more. His injuries, though healing, still made him unsteady, and several times Marn had to catch his arm to prevent a fall. Each time she did so without comment, without judgment, and Albie felt grateful beyond words for her steady presence. They stopped for lunch in a grove of pine trees, sharing dried meat and hard bread from Marn's pack. Around them, the mountain was alive with the sounds of melting snow, drips and trickles, small avalanches of powder sliding from branches. The world thawing, coming back to life. How much farther? Albie asked between bites. Another 2 hours to the main road. From there, maybe an hour's walk to town. Marn studied his face. You holding up? I'll make it. That's not what I asked. Albie smiled slightly. She'd learned to read him well in their days together. I'm scared. Terrified, actually. What if I call and David refuses? What if Emma doesn't want to see me? What if I've waited too long and destroyed any chance of connection? Then you'll know. And knowing is better than wondering, is it? Has to be. Otherwise, what's the point of trying? They finished their meal in silence, then continued down. With each step, Albie felt the weight of civilization approaching, the judgment of the world they'd both been hiding from, the complications of rejoining society, the risk of failure and rejection. But he also felt something else, a determination he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. By late afternoon, they reached the main road. It had been plowed since the storm, though snow still piled high on either side. A pickup truck passed them, the driver waving in that casual way rural people acknowledged each other. The simple human interaction felt both normal and extraordinary after days of isolation. The town, when they reached it, was small, perhaps 1,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed. They walked down the main street, Greta's hooves clopping on the cleared pavement, drawing a few curious glances. There, Marn said, pointing to a general store with a payphone outside. You want to do this now? Albie's mouth went dry. Now, the moment had arrived. After 8 years of carrying Emma's letter, after 72 years of avoiding difficult conversations, after a lifetime of running from his failures, the time had come to stop running. Yes, he heard himself say. Now! They tied Greta to a post, and Albie approached the phone like a man approaching his execution. Marn stood nearby, close enough for support, but far enough to give him space. He pulled out his wallet, waterlogged and worn, and found the scrap of paper where he'd written David's number years ago, copied from the return address on Emma's letter. His fingers shook as he fed coins into the phone. He dialed, each number a small commitment, a step further from retreat. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. A male voice answered, "Hello?" Albie's throat closed. He forced words through it. Is this David? David Hanson? Yes, who's this? This is... He paused, steadied himself. This is Albie Trenner, Lily's father, Emma's grandfather. There was a long silence on the other end. When David spoke again, his voice was cautious. Mr. Trenner, I didn't expect to hear from you. I know. I have no right to call. No right to ask anything of you. But I received Emma's letter, the one she wrote 8 years ago, and I need you to know that I should have responded then. Should have reached out. Should have been the grandfather she deserved. Another silence. Then why are you calling now? Because I'm trying to do better. Because I almost died a week ago, and it made me understand that I've been wasting the time I have left. Because Emma asked about trains and birds and her mother, and I want to answer her questions. If she'll let me. If you'll let me. He heard David breathing on the other end, weighing, deciding. Albie pressed on. I understand if you say no. If you think I've forfeited any right to know her. I understand if she's moved on, if she doesn't even remember writing that letter. But I need to try. I need her to know that I received her words, that they mattered, that she matters. More silence. Albie closed his eyes, preparing for rejection. Mr. Trenner, David said finally, his voice softer. Emma's asked about you. Not constantly, but over the years. She knows about the estrangement, knows that you and Lily weren't speaking when Lily died. She's 16 now, old enough to understand complicated family histories, and she's curious. About you, about her mom's childhood, about the stories Lily used to tell. I never stopped her from being curious. I just couldn't force a connection you didn't seem to want. I want it now. I know I should have wanted it then, but I'm asking for the chance to try now. David was quiet for another moment. Where are you? Idaho. Small town in the Sawtooth Range, but I can travel. I can come to wherever you are. We're in Denver. Have been since before Lily died. Denver. Albie's mind raced, calculating distances, costs, logistics. I can get there. It might take me a few days, but I can get there. And then what? You show up on our doorstep and Emma's supposed to welcome a stranger with open arms? No. I was hoping we could meet somewhere neutral. A coffee shop, a park, somewhere she feels safe. I just want the chance to talk to her, to answer her questions, to tell her about her mother. He paused, emotion threatening to choke his words. To tell her I'm sorry. For everything. The silence stretched so long that Albie thought the line had gone dead. Then David sighed, a sound heavy with consideration and caution, and maybe, just maybe, the smallest hint of compassion. All right, get to Denver. Call this number when you arrive. We'll set something up. Somewhere public, somewhere Emma can leave if she wants to. No promises about how it'll go. That's all I'm asking. Thank you. Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet. This is for Emma, not for you. She deserves the chance to know her grandfather, even if he's 8 years late showing up. I know. You're right. I'll call when I get there, Mr. Trenner. One more thing, yes? Emma's a good kid. Smart, kind, resilient. She's studying engineering at the State University. Wants to design sustainable transit systems. Trains, actually. She says her mom told her you knew everything about trains. Albie felt tears spring to his eyes. His granddaughter was studying engineering, interested in trains. Lily had told her about him, had kept that connection alive even when he'd severed it. Thank you for telling me that. He managed. Just thought you should know what you've been missing. David's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. Call when you get to Denver. The line went dead. Albie stood holding the phone, tears streaming down his face. Marn was beside him immediately, her hand on his arm. What happened? He said yes. Emma, she wants to meet me. She's curious about me. She's studying engineering. She wants to work on trains. The words tumbled out. I can see her. I can answer her questions. I can tell her about Lily. That's wonderful, Marn said, genuine warmth in her voice. I need to get to Denver. I don't know how. I don't have much money, but I need to get there. We'll figure it out. Together, remember. Albie looked at her, this woman who'd saved his life, who'd challenged his cowardice, who'd read Emma's letter when he couldn't, who'd agreed to leave her mountain exile to help him face his failures. You're still coming with me. Of course I'm coming. You think I'm going to let you do this alone? She smiled and it transformed her face. Besides, I made a promise to try. And trying means more than just leaving the mountain. It means seeing things through. They found a small motel at the edge of town, cheap, clean enough, with 2 twin beds and a radiator that clanked but worked. Albie paid with the last of his cash, and they settled in to plan. Bus to Boise, Marn said, studying a map from the motel office. From there, another bus to Denver. 2 days of travel, maybe 3 depending on connections. I don't have enough money for 2 bus tickets. I do. I've been saving my pension for years. Nothing to spend it on up there. She pulled out a worn envelope containing more cash than Albie would have expected. This is what trying looks like. Investing in something beyond survival. I'll pay you back. Stop, this isn't a loan. This is what people do when they care about each other. They help. They spent the evening making plans, buying supplies at the general store, calling the bus station to check schedules. Through it all, Albie kept touching the envelope in his pocket, Emma's letter, her photograph. His granddaughter, smart, kind, resilient, studying engineering, wanting to know about trains. That night, in the narrow motel beds, neither of them could sleep. The radiator clanked and hissed. Cars passed on the highway outside. The world felt both too large and too small, too large to navigate, too small to hide in anymore. Albie? Marn's voice came from the darkness. Yeah? What if I can't do it? What if we get to Denver and I panic? What if I can't handle being around people, being in a city? Then we'll handle it together. We'll take breaks when you need them. We'll find quiet places. We'll remember that healing isn't linear, that some days are harder than others. And if I want to go back to the mountain, then we'll talk about it. But I don't think you will. I think you're stronger than you believe. I think you've been ready to leave for a long time. You just needed a reason. What's my reason? Same as mine. To stop hiding, to try, to prove to yourself that you're still alive and that your life still has purpose. Silence filled the space between their beds. Then Marn spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I'm scared. Me too. But we're scared together. That's got to count for something. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. Inside, two people lay awake in the darkness, preparing for a journey that was both geographical and emotional. Denver waited. Emma waited. The world waited, indifferent to their fear but open to their trying. Tomorrow they would board a bus and leave the mountains behind. Tomorrow they would begin the real descent, not down a snowy slope, but into the complicated terrain of reconnection and healing. Tomorrow they would discover if the past could be addressed, if failures could be acknowledged, if love could bridge the gaps carved by time and pride and grief. But tonight, they rested in the cheap motel, two people who'd saved each other from freezing in more ways than one, preparing to face whatever came next with the fragile courage of those who'd finally stopped running and decided to try. The bus ride to Denver took 3 days that felt like 3 months. Albie and Marn changed buses twice, spent nights in station waiting rooms, ate vending machine sandwiches and truck stop coffee. Marn struggled with the crowds at first, her hands shaking, her breathing shallow, her eyes seeking exits. But each time she faltered, Albie was there, steady and present, reminding her to breathe, to focus on one moment at a time. You're doing fine, he'd say, when she gripped the armrest too tightly. Just fine, 1 mile at a time. And she was. By the second day, she could walk through a crowded station without her heart racing quite so fast. By the third day, she'd even made conversation with an elderly woman, sharing their bench. Discussing the weather and the landscape rolling past the windows, Denver emerged from the plains like a mirage, mountains behind it. Sprawled before it, the city a study in contrasts. The bus pulled into the downtown station on a cool afternoon in early March, the air smelling of diesel and possibility. Albie called David from a payphone at the station. His hands were steadier this time, his voice more certain. Mr. Trenner, David answered on the second ring. You made it. We're in Denver, at the bus station. We? I have a friend with me, Marn. She's been helping me through this. A pause, then, all right. Emma wants to meet tomorrow. There's a park near our house. Washington Park. Do you know it? I'll find it. 2 o'clock. I'll be there with her. You'll recognize her. She looks like Lily. Albie closed his eyes, steadying himself. Thank you, David. Thank you for giving me this chance. Like I said, this is for Emma. Don't disappoint her. I won't, I promise. They found a modest hotel near the park. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable. Albie paid with money Marn insisted was theirs, not just hers. They checked in, settled into their separate rooms, and Albie found himself unable to sit still. He paced, checking his reflection in the mirror, straightening his shirt, running through what he might say. A knock at his door. Marn stood there, looking equally nervous. Can't sleep. Can't even sit down. Me either. Want to walk? They walked the Denver streets as evening fell, two people from the mountains, adjusting to the rhythm of the city. The noise bothered Marn at first, the traffic, the sirens, the constant hum of humanity, but gradually she adapted, finding a strange comfort in the anonymity of crowds. You could disappear here, she observed. Just another face among thousands. Is that what you want? To disappear? No, not anymore. I just notice it's possible. She paused at a corner, watching people pass. In the mountains, there was nowhere to hide. Here there are 1,000 places. But I don't think I need to hide anymore. They found Washington Park as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was a beautiful space, walking paths around lakes, old trees, benches where people sat watching ducks. Albie stood at the edge and tried to imagine Emma here tomorrow, tried to picture what he'd say, how he'd explain 8 years of silence. "What if I freeze?" he asked Marn. "What if I see her and can't speak? Then I'll nudge you, remind you to breathe, remind you why you came." She touched his arm. "You won't freeze. You've been waiting too long for this moment to waste it in silence." They returned to the hotel, and Albie tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. He lay in the dark, Emma's letter on the nightstand beside him, her photograph propped against the lamp where he could see it. His granddaughter, smart, kind, resilient, studying engineering, wanting to know about trains. That night, in the narrow motel beds, neither of them could sleep. The radiator clanked and hissed. Cars passed on the highway outside. The world felt both too large and too small. Too large to navigate, too small to hide in anymore. "Albie?" Marn's voice came from the darkness. "Yeah? What if I can't do it? What if we get to Denver and I panic? What if I can't handle being around people, being in a city? Then we'll handle it together. We'll take breaks when you need them. We'll find quiet places. We'll remember that healing isn't linear, that some days are harder than others. And if I want to go back to the mountain, then we'll talk about it. But I don't think you will. I think you're stronger than you believe. I think you've been ready to leave for a long time. You just needed a reason. What's my reason? Same as mine. To stop hiding, to try, to prove to yourself that you're still alive and that your life still has purpose." Silence filled the space between their beds. Then Marn spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared." "Me too. But we're scared together. That's got to count for something." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. Inside, 2 people lay awake in the darkness, preparing for a journey that was both geographical and emotional. Denver waited. Emma waited. The world waited. Indifferent to their fear, but open to their trying. Tomorrow they would board a bus and leave the mountains behind. Tomorrow they would begin the real descent. Not down a snowy slope, but into the complicated terrain of reconnection and healing. Tomorrow they would discover if the past could be addressed, if failures could be acknowledged, if love could bridge the gaps carved by time and pride and grief. But tonight, they rested in the cheap motel, 2 people who'd saved each other from freezing in more ways than one, preparing to face whatever came next with the fragile courage of those who'd finally stopped running and decided to try. The bus ride to Denver took 3 days that felt like 3 months. Albie and Marn changed buses twice, spent nights in station waiting rooms, ate vending machine sandwiches and truck stop coffee. Marn struggled with the crowds at first, her hands shaking, her breathing shallow, her eyes seeking exits. But each time she faltered, Albie was there, steady and present, reminding her to breathe, to focus on one moment at a time. "You're doing fine," he'd say when she gripped the armrest too tightly. "Just fine. 1 mile at a time," and she was. By the second day, she could walk through a crowded station without her heart racing quite so fast. By the 3rd day, she'd even made conversation with an elderly woman sharing their bench, discussing the weather and the landscape rolling past the windows. Denver emerged from the plains like a mirage, mountains behind it. Sprawled before it, the city a study in contrasts. The bus pulled into the downtown station on a cool afternoon in early March, the air smelling of diesel and possibility. Albie called David from a payphone at the station. His hands were steadier this time, his voice more certain. "Mr. Trenner," David answered on the 2nd ring. "You made it. We're in Denver. At the bus station." "We?" "I have a friend with me, Marn. She's been helping me through this." A pause, then, "All right. Emma wants to meet tomorrow. There's a park near our house, Washington Park. Do you know it?" "I'll find it. 2 o'clock. "I'll be there with her. You'll recognize her. She looks like Lily." Albie closed his eyes, steadying himself. "Thank you, David. Thank you for giving me this chance. Like I said, this is for Emma. Don't disappoint her." "I won't, I promise." They found a modest hotel near the park. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable. Albie paid with money Marn insisted was theirs, not just hers. They checked in, settled into their separate rooms, and Albie found himself unable to sit still. He paced, checking his reflection in the mirror, straightening his shirt, running through what he might say. A knock at his door. Marn stood there looking equally nervous. "Can't sleep, can't even sit down. Me either. Want to walk?" They walked the Denver streets as evening fell, two people from the mountains, adjusting to the rhythm of the city. The noise bothered Marn at first. The traffic, the sirens, the constant hum of humanity. But gradually she adapted, finding a strange comfort in the anonymity of crowds. "You could disappear here," she observed. "Just another face among thousands. Is that what you want? To disappear?" "No, not anymore. I just notice it's possible." She paused at a corner, watching people pass. In the mountains, there was nowhere to hide. Here, there are 1,000 places. But I don't think I need to hide anymore. They found Washington Park as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was a beautiful space. Walking paths around lakes, old trees, benches where people sat watching ducks. Albie stood at the edge and tried to imagine Emma here tomorrow, tried to picture what he'd say, how he'd explain 8 years of silence. "What if I freeze?" he asked Marn. "What if I see her and can't speak? Then I'll nudge you, remind you to breathe, remind you why you came." She touched his arm. "You won't freeze. You've been waiting too long for this moment to waste it in silence." They returned to the hotel, and Albie tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. He lay in the dark, Emma's letter on the nightstand beside him, her photograph propped against the lamp where he could see it. His granddaughter. Tomorrow. After 16 years of her life and 8 years since her letter, tomorrow he would finally meet her. Morning arrived with agonizing slowness. Albie showered, shaved carefully, dressed in the cleanest clothes he had. Marn knocked at 8, bringing coffee and pastries from a shop down the street. "You need to eat," she said. "Can't meet your granddaughter on an empty stomach." He forced down half a pastry, sipped the coffee. His hands trembled slightly. The clock on the wall seemed to mock him, its hands barely moving. 10 o'clock, 11 noon. At 1:30, they walked to the park. Albie carried nothing but Emma's letter in his pocket and Marcus's compass that Marn had pressed into his hands. "For courage," she'd said. "It brought us down the mountain. It'll guide you through this too." They found a bench with a view of the main path. Marn sat beside him, silent support. The minutes crawled. 2 o'clock arrived, then passed. 2:15. Albie's stomach churned. Had they changed their minds? Had Emma decided she didn't want to see him after all? Then he saw them. A man in his 40s, kind-faced and cautious, walking beside a teenage girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was tall, slender, wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt. As they drew closer, Albie's breath caught. Marn had been right. Emma looked like Lily. Same eyes, same way of carrying herself, same determined set to her jaw. But there was something of Albie there, too. In the shape of her face, in her hands, in the stubborn line of her shoulders. David spotted them and nodded, guiding Emma toward their bench. Emma's expression was guarded, curious, nervous. When she was 10 feet away, her eyes met Albie's, and time seemed to stop. This was his granddaughter. This was Lily's daughter. This was the child who'd written to him 8 years ago, asking about trains and birds and her mother's childhood. This was Emma. Albie stood on shaking legs. Marn rose beside him, her presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment. David stopped a few feet away, one hand on Emma's shoulder. Protective, cautious. "Emma," David said quietly, "this is your grandfather." Albie Trenner. Emma studied him for a long moment, her eyes taking in every detail, his weathered face, his work-worn hands, the obvious nervousness in his stance. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but held an edge of challenge. "Did you get my letter?" It was the first question, the most important question. Albie felt the weight of it, the weight of 8 years of silence, the weight of all his failures pressing down. He pulled the envelope from his pocket, held it out so she could see the worn edges, the faded ink. "I got it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. 8 years ago I got it, and I should have answered it then. Should have called, should have written back, should have been the grandfather you deserved. I didn't, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Emma. She looked at the envelope, at the evidence of his long carrying of her words. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps understanding, or at least the willingness to listen. Why didn't you? She asked. Why wait 8 years? Albie took a breath, knowing that this moment required complete honesty. No excuses, no deflections, just the truth. Because I was afraid, he said. Afraid of the grief I'd feel reading your words. Afraid I'd see your mother in them and it would hurt too much. Afraid you'd ask questions I didn't know how to answer. So I carried your letter for 8 years like a coward, and I robbed both of us of the connection your mother would have wanted us to have. Emma absorbed this, her jaw working slightly. Mom talked about you. Even when she was hurt, even when she was angry about your estrangement, she still talked about you. She wanted me to know who you were. What did she say? That you were stubborn, that you worked harder than anyone she knew, that you taught her to identify birds by their songs and fix things that seemed impossible to fix. Emma's voice softened slightly. She said you were sad, that something in you had broken and she didn't know how to fix it. She said she tried. She did try. Your mother tried for years. I was the one who failed. I was angry at myself for being a poor father, and I took that anger out on her. When she asked me to meet you, I refused because his voice broke, because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong. And 3 months later, she was gone. Tears glistened in Emma's eyes, but she held them back. I was 8 when she died. I barely remember her now. I've pictures, videos, stories Dad tells me, but I don't remember her voice anymore. Not really. She had a laugh that could fill a room, Albie said, the memory sudden and vivid. When she was really amused, really delighted, she'd throw her head back and laugh from her belly. Margaret, your grandmother, used to say Lily's laugh was contagious, that you couldn't help but laugh along with her. Emma's composure cracked slightly. I don't remember that. I don't remember her laugh. She was fierce when she was little. Stubborn like me, but in a better way. Once when she was about 6, another kid in the neighborhood was bullying a smaller boy. Lily marched right up to the bully, this kid was twice her size, and told him to stop. When he didn't, she pushed him down and stood over the smaller boy until the bully left. A small smile touched Emma's lips. That sounds like what Dad says about her. That she stood up for people. She did. She stood up for me more times than I deserved. Even at the end, even when I pushed her away, she was still trying to build a bridge. Albie looked at his granddaughter, this young woman he should have known for 16 years, but was only meeting now. Your letter asked about trains. You said your mother told you I knew everything about trains. She said you worked on railroads your whole life, that you could tell stories about every stretch of track from Spokane to Pocatello. I can, and I will, if you want to hear them. You also said you get sad sometimes, that it feels like a hole in your chest. You said maybe we could be unsad together. Emma's carefully maintained composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was 8. I didn't know what else to say. I just wanted someone who knew Mom, someone who could tell me about her. Dad tries, but he didn't know her as a kid. He didn't know her before she was his wife. I did. I knew her from the moment she was born until I stopped letting myself know her. And I will tell you everything you want to know. Every story, every memory, everything she was before you knew her. Albie took a step closer. If you'll let me. If you're willing to give me the chance I didn't give you 8 years ago. Emma looked at David, who nodded slightly. Permission, encouragement. She looked at Marn, who smiled gently. Then she looked back at Albie, this grandfather who'd been absent for her entire life, but who stood before her now with tears on his face and her childhood, letter in his hand. I have questions, she said. I'll answer all of them, and I'm angry. At you, at the situation, at everything we lost. You have every right to be, but I want to know about Mom, about you, about trains and birds and all the things she said you knew. Emma wiped her eyes. And I want you to know about me, about my life, my studies, my dreams. Her voice broke. I want what she wanted. For us to know each other. Albie felt something break open in his chest, not the hole Emma had described, but something else. A release, maybe, or a beginning. So do I, more than anything. Emma stepped forward, closing the distance between them. For a moment, they stood face to face, grandfather and granddaughter, strangers bound by blood and loss and missed opportunities. Then Emma did something neither of them expected. She reached out and took Albie's hand. Her grip was strong, certain. "Tell me about the trains," she said. "Tell me everything." And Albie, this old man who'd been dying in the snow just days ago, who'd carried guilt and grief for decades, who'd almost let pride and fear steal this moment from him, smiled through his tears and began to talk. He told her about the first time he rode a train, about the rhythm of wheels on tracks, about the way the whistle sounded in mountain passes. He told her about her mother as a little girl, begging him to take her to see the trains, pressing her ear to the rails to feel them coming. He told her about Margaret, about family dinners, about ordinary days that became precious in retrospect. David and Marn stepped back, giving them space. Emma listened, asked questions, laughed at some stories and cried at others. And slowly, carefully, impossibly, a bridge began to form across 8 years of silence, 16 years of absence, and all the grief that had kept them apart. They talked for 2 hours in that park, sitting on a bench while Denver moved around them. When the sun began to set, David gently reminded Emma of homework, of responsibilities. But before they parted, Emma asked one more question. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Albie's heart swelled. "Yes, anytime, anywhere. Coffee shop near campus? 10 o'clock? I'll be there." Emma hugged him then, quick, awkward, but real. Then she stepped back, gave Marn a shy smile, and walked away with her father, looking back twice before they rounded the corner. Albie stood watching long after they disappeared. Emma's letter still clutched in his hand, his heart fuller than it had been in decades. "You did it," Marn said softly beside him. "We did it. I couldn't have without you." They walked back to the hotel as night fell. Two people who'd climbed down from their separate mountains and found, at the bottom, something worth the descent. Tomorrow, Albie would meet Emma again. Tomorrow, they would build on the bridge they'd started today. Tomorrow, there would be more stories, more questions, more chances to answer the letter that had waited 8 years to be read. But tonight, in a Denver hotel room, Albie sat with Emma's photograph and allowed himself to hope. Hope that the past could be addressed. Hope that relationships could be rebuilt. Hope that it was never too late to try. Marn knocked on his door before bed. "You okay?" "Better than okay." "Thank you. For everything. Get some rest." "You've got coffee with your granddaughter tomorrow." "I do." "I have coffee with my granddaughter tomorrow." He said it again, testing the words, finding joy in them. "I have a granddaughter," Marn smiled. "You do, and she's wonderful." After she left, Albie lay in bed and thought about second chances, about the ways people save each other, about how asking for milk from a stranger could lead to this, to connection, to healing, to the beginning of something he'd thought he'd lost forever, family. 3 months later, spring had fully claimed Denver. The trees in Washington Park had leafed out, the grass had turned green, and the city pulsed with the energy of renewal. Albie stood at the same bench where he'd first met Emma, but now it felt like familiar territory rather than battleground. He'd met Emma 17 times since that first afternoon. Coffee dates, walks in the park, a visit to her engineering lab at the university where she'd shown him her designs for improved rail systems. Each meeting had built on the last, constructing a relationship that would never recover the lost 16 years, but was creating something new and genuine in their place. She called him Grandpa now. It had happened spontaneously during their 5th meeting, when she'd been explaining a complex problem with train switching systems, and had said, "What do you think, Grandpa?" The name had hung in the air between them for a moment, both of them surprised, before Albie had smiled and answered her question. After that, it stuck. David had warmed to him too, cautiously at first, but with growing respect as Albie showed up consistently, kept his promises, and treated Emma with the care and respect she deserved. Last week, David had invited Albie to dinner at their home. The first time Albie had been welcomed into Lily's space, surrounded by photographs of the daughter he'd failed, but who'd built a good life despite his absence. Today, Emma was bringing someone to meet him. A surprise, she'd said on the phone. Someone I want you and Marn to meet. Marn. She stood beside him now, her transformation as remarkable as his own. She'd found work at a library downtown, starting part-time, but recently increased to full-time. She'd rented a small apartment, joined a book club, begun tentatively rebuilding a life that involved other people. The mountain cabin still existed. She'd gone back once to collect a few more belongings, but she no longer lived there, no longer needed it as a hiding place. They'd become family to each other, he and Marn. Not romantic. Neither of them wanted or needed that. But something deeper, perhaps. Two people who'd saved each other and who continued to witness and support each other's healing. They had dinner twice a week, called each other when the grief got heavy, reminded each other that being alive was still worth the effort. There she is, Marn said. Pointing, Emma was crossing the park with David and another woman, older, perhaps in her 70s, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. As they drew closer, Albie realized who she must be. "Grandpa Marn," Emma said, slightly breathless from walking fast. "This is Margaret Stone. She was Grandma Margaret's sister." "Your sister-in-law," Albie's heart lurched. Margaret's sister. His wife's sister. He'd lost contact with her after Margaret's death, too wrapped up in his own grief to maintain any connection with her family. "Albie," Margaret Stone said softly. "It's been a long time. Too long. I'm sorry." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Emma found me. She wanted to know about both sides of her family, so she tracked me down through old addresses. I've been telling her stories about Margaret, about Lily when she was young. Emma's been doing detective work," David added with pride. "Her building a family tree, connecting pieces." Emma looked at Albie with determination and hope. "I want to know everyone, all the stories, everything about Mom and Grandma and you and all the people who made us who we are. Aunt Margaret has been amazing. She's told me so much. And I've heard what you've been telling Emma," Margaret Stone said to Albie, "about the trains, about Lily's childhood. She plays me the voice recordings you've been making for her. You've been recording stories." Marn asked Albie. "Emma suggested it," Albie explained. "Said she wanted to be able to listen to them later, share them with her own children someday. So I've been recording memories, stories about the railroad, about Lily, about Margaret, about everything I should have shared years ago. He's made almost 30 hours of recordings," Emma said proudly. "It's like having an oral history of the family. And now, with Aunt Margaret adding her memories, we're building something real, something that connects all of us." They moved to a nearby bench. Emma insisted they all sit together for a photograph. She pulled out her phone, set up the timer, and positioned them, Albie and Marn on either end, Emma and David in the middle, Margaret Stone beside Albie. 3 generations. Plus the woman who'd made the connection possible. The phone camera clicked. Emma checked the image, smiled with satisfaction. "Perfect. This is going in the family album." They spent the afternoon in the park, telling stories, filling in gaps, weaving together the threads of lives that had been separate too long. Margaret Stone shared memories of Lily as a teenager, of family vacations, of Margaret in her prime. Emma asked questions, recorded answers, built bridges between past and present. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Albie found himself sitting with Emma while the others walked around the lake. She leaned against his shoulder, a simple gesture of trust and affection that still amazed him every time it happened. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back, for trying. Thank you for giving me the chance, for writing that letter all those years ago, for being brave enough to reach out when I was too much of a coward. You're not a coward. You were hurt. There's a difference. Your friend Marn taught me that. Hurt and guilt and cowardice, they're all different things. I was carrying all 3, but I'm trying to put them down now. Are you succeeding?" "Some days yes, some days no. But I'm trying. That's what matters." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you found Marn, and that she found you. I think you saved each other." "We did. Sometimes that's how it works. You save someone while they're saving you, and neither of you realizes it until later. Like in your story. About the mountain cabin and the storm. Albie had told her the whole story. About collapsing in the snow. About asking for milk. About Marn opening her door despite every reason not to. Emma had been fascinated, had asked to hear it multiple times, had even met Marn for coffee separately to hear her side of it. Just like that, Albie agreed. I was dying and she pulled me inside. But really, I think I pulled her out at the same time. We both needed rescuing. David called out that they should head to dinner. He'd made reservations at a restaurant nearby, his treat. As they gathered their things and walked through the park, Albie found himself surrounded by family. Not the family he hadn't lost, but the family he'd found by finally being brave enough to stop running. Emma walked beside him, talking about her latest engineering project. Marn and Margaret Stone had fallen into conversation about books. David walked with his arm around Emma's shoulders, protective and proud. And Albie, 72 years old, a lifetime of mistakes behind him, but a future that felt suddenly full of possibility, walked among them, part of something larger than his grief, his guilt, his long isolation. That night, back at his modest apartment, Marn had helped him find it, had even loaned him money for the deposit. Albie sat at his small kitchen table with Emma's letter and the photograph spread before him. Beside them, he'd placed a new photograph, the one from today, all of them together in the park, 3 generations plus, the woman who'd saved him and the aunt who'd emerged from the past to add her memories to the collection. He thought about that morning on the mountain, collapsing in the snow, certain he was dying. Thought about the words he'd managed to rasp out, "Just some milk, please." The smallest request, the humblest admission of need. And from that small moment all of this had followed. Connection, healing, family, hope. Sometimes salvation comes in the smallest requests, he thought. Sometimes a stranger's kindness rewrites the ending we thought we'd written. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to ask for help, we find we're not just saving ourselves, we're saving each other. He picked up his phone and called Marn. "You okay?" She answered. "Better than okay. Just wanted to say thank you, again." "For what?" "For opening the door, for everything that came after. You opened a door too," she said. "For both of us." They talked for a few minutes more, making plans to have dinner later in the week, saying goodnight with the casual ease of people who knew they'd see each other soon. After hanging up, Albie sat in his small apartment and looked at the photographs again. Emma grinning at the camera, Marn smiling genuine and warm, Margaret Stone with her kind eyes, David protective and welcoming. All of them together, a family built from broken pieces. Proof that it's never too late to try. Outside, Denver continued its evening rhythm, cars passing, people living their lives, the world turning indifferent to individual struggles and triumphs. Inside, an old man who'd once been dying in the snow sat surrounded by evidence of life still being lived, of connections still being made, of love still being possible. He thought about the cabin on the mountain, about those days trapped in the storm, with a stranger who became family. He thought about how far he'd come in 3 months, how far Marn had come, how Emma had welcomed him, despite every reason to turn him away. And he thought about milk. Simple, ordinary milk. The smallest thing to ask for. The humblest admission of need. The beginning of everything. Just some milk, please. Sometimes that's all it takes. One small request. One open door. One person willing to help and another willing to be helped. From that, everything else becomes possible. Albie stood, walked to his window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Emma was doing homework. Marn was reading in her apartment. Margaret Stone was looking through old photographs. David was washing dishes and planning tomorrow. And Albie, Albert James Trenner, 72 years old, former railroad worker, father, grandfather, friend, was alive. Truly alive for the first time in decades. He touched the window glass, felt its coolness against his palm, and smiled. Thank you, he thought, sending the words out to Marn, to Emma, to the universe that had given him this unexpected second chance. Thank you for the milk and everything that came after. The city lights twinkled in response. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to heal or to fail, to connect or to retreat. But tonight, Albie rested in the certainty that he'd finally stopped running, that he'd found his way back to the land of the living, that he'd been given a gift he thought he'd forfeited forever, a family, a purpose, a reason to keep trying. And it all started with 3 simple words: just some milk, please.